Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to be on the receiving end of ancient Rome's most infamous sentences? Picture yourself in a dimly lit arena, torches flickering against marble columns as a hush falls over the crowd. There's an almost surreal calm until you realize that beyond the dust and shadows, instruments of punishment await. Tonight, before you drift off into sleep, let me guide you through these bizarre Roman penalties. I promise no sudden jolts, just my steady voice, painting vivid scenes that will both intrigue and, perhaps, lull you toward dreaming. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the roar of the forum, but not for gladiators. Instead, focus on the grim procession of the condemned. Clergywomen accused of breaking sacred vows, traitors bound for the riverbank, and dissenters bracing for a public spectacle of agony. What compels us to stare into history's darkest corners? Maybe it's our fascination with extremes, our need to understand how power was wielded when mercy was scarce. Or perhaps it's the odd comfort of knowing that, at least, we're not living in that era. So tuck yourself in. Feel the weight of your blankets settle around you, like the comforting cloak of civilization that gradually replaced Rome's brutal pageantry. Let your breathing slow. As we step into the first chapter, where oaths and taboos turned into pitiless rituals, remember, you're safe here, cushioned by blankets instead of bones. And if you find your eyes growing heavy, that's perfectly fine. These stories aren't horror for horror's sake. They're windows into a world that seems almost too strange to be true. Ready? Let's journey back 2 millennia and explore the sacred oaths and taboos that, when broken, led to some of Rome's most bizarre punishments. The Vestal Virgins were, more than temple servants, they were living symbols of Rome's divine favor. Tasked with tending the eternal flame of Vesta, they took a vow of chastity that was as much political safeguard as spiritual promise. But what happens when that vow is broken? The penalty was neither swift nor merciful. The offending Vestal was buried alive. Imagine the scene. The condemned woman, clad in her pure white tunic, is led from the temple through the forum's columned porticos. Onlookers part in reverence and fear, their whispers echoing off the stone walls. She's given a small bundle, bread, water, perhaps a modest oil lamp, and lowered gently into a brick-lined chamber beneath the ground. The slab is sealed overhead, and the earth is piled atop. Why bury rather than behead? Some scholars suggest that spilling the blood of a Vestal would offend the gods, turning divine wrath upon Rome itself. So instead, the city opted for a paradoxical punishment: death without direct bloodshed. As the soil pressed down, the condemned could feel each grain of sand, a relentless reminder of the sacred trust she had shattered. Yet there's an odd poetry in this burial. The Vestal's last rites are performed silently, her transition from life to death hidden from the public eye, a stark contrast to the grand, often gruesome spectacles reserved for other criminals. Could you imagine the psychological torment of that solitude? Lowered into darkness, the Vestal faced an eternity of silence and earth, her own broken oath interred alongside her. If Rome's burial ritual seems surreal, consider the poena culli, a sentence reserved for those guilty of parricide, killing one's father or mother. The convicted was sewn into a large leather sack, along with a motley crew of live animals, typically a dog, a snake, a monkey, and a rooster. Once tied up, the bag was thrown into a river, often the Tiber, where the condemned drowned, burdened, not only by water, but by the panicked weight and thrashing of their companions. Close your eyes and picture it. The sack hitting the water's surface with a dull splash, fish scatter. The dog's low growls mix with the hiss of the snake. Monkeys shriek and flutter their arms, while the rooster's frantic flapping adds a frantic beat to the chaos. Underwater, limbs tangle. Panic sets in quickly. The walls of the sack press inward as water floods the seams, and breath escapes in a gurgle. This punishment was layered with symbolic cruelty. Parricide tore at the heart of Roman family values. Pietas, the sacred duty to one's parents. By placing animals in the sack, Rome equated the parricide's crime with base, beastly behavior. The more the individual struggled for life, the more they embodied the animal impulses they had embraced in betraying their parent. In death, they became a tableau: human, dog, snake, monkey, and rooster, all thrashing together in a final, grotesque communion. What's truly chilling is the deliberate set of animals. The dog symbolized loyalty turned on its head. The snake, treachery. The monkey, foolish imitation of man. And the rooster, the herald of dawn, now silenced. The Romans didn't just punish the body, they constructed a living allegory of moral failure. When we think of crucifixion, our minds often jump to the common image of a man nailed upright to a wooden cross. Yet in Rome, sometimes executioners chose a macabre inversion, literally turning the condemned upside down. This inverted crucifixion was more than a variation on an already brutal practice. It was a calculated spectacle, engineered to amplify both physical suffering and psychological torment. Imagine dawn breaking over a Roman hill. A scaffold stands ready in the forum, though today its silhouette looks strangely alien. Its crossbeam is affixed lower than usual. A man in rough woolen tunic, hands and feet bound, is hoisted aloft. But instead of his head rising toward the sky, his feet point heavenward, his face flushed by the morning sun. He's suspended by his ankles, his arms strapped to the timbers so that his torso hangs forward in a grotesque bow. A hush grips the assembled crowd. Merchants lower their shutters. Children stare, mouths agape. Even the city's dogs fall silent. There's an almost ritualistic formality to it. The ritual knobs of drilled wooden pegs, the leather straps biting into flesh, and the columned backdrop, icons of law and order, now witnesses to an inverted mockery of justice. From a medical perspective, hanging upside down is a form of torture in its own right. Blood rushes to the head, causing pounding pain behind the eyes and swelling of the face. The diaphragm is pressed upward, making breathing difficult. Each inhale feels like sipping air through a straw clogged with lead. The weight of internal organs shifts. Intestines press against the lungs and heart, adding crushing pressure to each breath. Over time, this stress leads to a dangerous cascade. Fluid seeps into the lungs, the prisoner's vision blurs, and consciousness wanes under the relentless pressure. And still, the execution has not reached its climax. Sometimes the inverted figure would remain suspended for hours. Guards might tighten straps to prolong agony, or puncture the ankles to hasten blood loss. To the crowd, the spectacle unfolds in agonizing slow motion. Spittle gathers on the prisoner's lips, his tunic soaks with sweat and blood. Birds swoop in to peck at exposed wounds. And in the midst of all this, some wags in the audience toss figs or nuts at the gibbet. Tiny, missiles of mockery that thud against wooden beams. Torture in ancient Rome was never just about physical suffering. It was theatre, a lesson in power. By inverting the victim, Rome sent a clear message. We control gravity, we control life. The man who once walked upright in society is now grotesquely mangled by gravity, a living poster of humiliation. Moreover, the upside-down cross would later become a symbol, in Christian legend, of humility. St. Peter is said to have asked for crucifixion upside down, feeling unworthy to die in the same manner as Christ. But in pagan Rome, inversion held no such sanctified echo. It was pure mockery. The condemned looked ludicrous, face to ground, buttocks to sky, thereby stripping him of dignity in the most literal sense. Witnessing this, citizens felt both horror and validation. Horror because they saw the extremes of human cruelty. Validation because they knew the power to enact such cruelty was in the hands of their leaders, not chaotic mob justice. The inverted crucifixion wasn't popular entertainment like gladiatorial games, but it reinforced the idea that Roman law was omnipotent. It could challenge the very laws of nature. One of the more infamous cases involved a notorious rebel leader named Marcus Licinius Crassus, no relation to the wealthy triumvir. who led a failed slave uprising in 73 BCE. After his capture, Crassus was displayed in the Forum, his body inverted for 3 days. Ancient chroniclers tell of Roman matrons averting their eyes, while children dared one another to scream insults at the shackled man. Then there's the account of Petilius Saturninus, a provincial governor accused of treason under Emperor Tiberius. His execution was cloaked in secrecy. Few knew the precise charges, but Rome's elite understood the message. Even the powerful could be cast down, rendered helpless by imperial whim. The inverted crucifixion of Saturninus took place at night, torches casting gruesome shadows across his contorted form. According to later biographers, his final cries blended with the crackling of burning torch oil, a symphony of spectacle and terror. Today, inverted crucifixion lingers in our collective imagination as an emblem of extreme humiliation. Yet its true power lay not just in the method, but in what it represented. Rome's insistence on breaking every facet of a person's identity, physical posture, social honor, even cosmic order. By the time modern society abolished such practices, the inversion had already embedded itself in cultural memory as a symbol of ultimate degradation. But let's pause and reflect. Why are we so compelled to revisit these horrors as we drift towards sleep? Perhaps because, in the safe cocoon of our beds, we can confront humanity's darkest impulses without risk. We can admit our fascination with cruelty, then exhale, knowing our blankets will shield us. And as we ponder inverted crosses and bloodied ankles, we're reminded of the fragility of dignity and the importance of empathy that centuries of progress have taught us to cherish. Rome's leaders understood that the harshest punishments served two audiences, the condemned and the crowd. By staging executions as public theatre, they reinforced the might of the state and instilled a collective dread. In this section, we explore two methods that exemplify this blend of brutality and pageantry: decimation and the fork of heretics. When a Roman legion faltered, refusing orders, retreating without cause, or displaying cowardice, the punishment could extend beyond a single officer to the entire unit. This extreme measure was called decimation, from Latin decem, 10. 1 in every 10 soldiers was selected by lot and put to death by his comrades. Imagine a dusty training ground at dawn. Ranks of legionaries stand in formation, their red cloaks muted in the pale light. A centurion steps forward, his face grim. He plunges his gladius into a straw hat, indicating the draw of lots. One soldier steps forward, then another, until 10 men stand apart. The condemned are ordered to strip to their tunics. Their fellow soldiers form a tight circle. Armed with short clubs or stones, they become executioners. The first blow cracks the skull. Others follow swiftly, each man striking his comrade, each stroke a reminder that disobedience is a betrayal, not only of Rome, but of the brotherhood of arms itself. Why so savage? Decimation was as much psychological warfare as it was discipline. Consider the terror as you watch your tentmate's life end at your own hand. Survivors' guilt and fear would echo through the ranks long after the execution. It shattered the bonds of trust, ensuring that no soldier would risk disgrace, and that no commander would hesitate to wield such terror. Classical historian Livy describes an early instance under the consul Appius Claudius in 493 BCE. After a retreat at the Battle of the Allia, doomed legionaries were decimated to punish cowardice before facing the Gauls again. The survivors, drenched in blood and shame, reportedly fought with renewed ferocity at Rome's gates. The Greeks, and later, military thinkers condemned decimation for eroding unit cohesion, but Romans prized its unflinching efficacy. In a world where discipline meant life or death, decimation stood as a stark announcement. Failure would not be tolerated, and mercy was reserved for the obedient. While decimation targeted the state's own ranks, the fork of heretics was aimed at those deemed threats to religious unity: Christians, Jews accused of subversion, or philosophical cults challenging Rome's gods. This punishment combined physical agony with symbolic desecration, using a three-pronged iron fork called furca heretica. Here's how it unfolded. The heretic was stripped, tied, or chained upright against a post. The executioner, wearing protective gloves and a leather apron, would thrust the fork's tines into the condemned's flesh, often through the shoulders, chest, or abdomen. Each puncture created 3 open wounds, transforming the victim into a grotesque human sculpture, their form skewered by the very tool named for their supposed crime. Visualize the scene. A makeshift stage before the temple steps. The heretic stands rigid, eyes wide with fear or defiance. A hush falls as the fork is raised. First wound, an audible gasp. Second wound, a sharp cry piercing the morning air. By the third, blood drips in slow arcs, splattering the marble. Below, bystanders recoil. Some fall to their knees, praying for deliverance. Others stare, fascinated by the macabre artistry. The furca heretica carried deep symbolism. In Roman religion, forks, bifurca or furca, were sometimes used in initiation, rites, tools of purification. By twisting its use into a torture device, authorities inverted sacred symbolism. The path to divine knowledge became a route to excruciating death. Writers of the early Christian church later recounted martyrs who met this end. Saint Ignatius of Antioch, though not killed by the fork, he was thrown to beasts, spoke of heretics pierced by forks, suggesting that Christians saw themselves cast in the role of suffering innocents. The exact historical frequency of this punishment remains debated. Some modern scholars argue it was rare, intended more as a deterrent than a routine sentence. Whether common or exceptional, the fork of heretics embodied Rome's efforts to safeguard religious orthodoxy and to make an example of those who threatened the Pax Deorum, peace of the gods. By turning a fork into an execution instrument, Rome demonstrated that it could co-opt and corrupt even its own sacred symbols to maintain control. Both decimation and the fork of heretics underscore Rome's willingness to meld symbolism, cruelty, and public spectacle. Decimation showed that collective punishment could reinforce unity through shared terror. Soldiers forced to kill comrades to ensure compliance. The fork of heretics revealed how religious dissent was silenced by transforming a symbol of sacrificial rites into a tool of violent repression. As you settle deeper into your blanket's embrace, consider the paradox. These punishments were designed to unmake individuals, yet they also serve to forge a more obedient society. In the safety of your bed, you can confront these horrors without risk. You can ponder the delicate balance between order and cruelty, and marvel at how far our notions of justice have evolved. Perched high above Rome's Capitoline Hill lies the Tarpeian Rock, a sheer cliff face that once served as a grim execution site. Criminals found guilty of treason, sedition, or severe breaches of military discipline were escorted to this natural gallows. There, in full view of the city below, they were hurled to their deaths. Imagine the sun hovering just past its zenith, casting stark shadows across the limestone outcrop. Citizens below pause in their daily tasks. Merchants halt their bargaining, children cease their games, and priests lower their heads in solemnity. At the cliff's edge, a small contingency of lictors, bodyguards, stands guard, their fasces, bundles of rods, resting on the ground. The condemned, hands bound, is forced to his knees. A final chant in archaic Latin intones the state's authority. With a push that carries more symbolic weight than physical force, the miscreant tumbles forward. Gravity takes over instantly. In those split seconds, the man's cloak billows like dark wings. His limbs flail as the sextant's edge slips out of reach. The drop, from 30 to 50 feet, ensures immediate impact. A sickening crack echoes off the rock face, followed by moans or silence, depending on how swiftly the body absorbs the blow. The Tarpeian Rock executed more than bodies, it executed reputations. The cliff overlooked the Forum, the heart of Roman civic life. By casting traitors from this vantage point, Rome declared to its citizens, Betrayal leads to utter erasure. There is no hiding from the eye of the state. The public nature of the act functioned as a brutal form of exile, sending a message that the condemned were forever cast out of the community of the living and the honored dead. Perhaps the most infamous of Rome's cruelest entertainments was damnatio ad bestias, a sentence that condemned humans to face wild animals in the amphitheater. Unlike gladiatorial combat, here the victim was utterly defenseless, often stripped of even a wooden sword. Picture the Colosseum's arena floor, an expanse of sand churned by hoofprints, bloodstains, and the tracks of heavy cages. Gates hiss open to reveal snarling beasts, lions, tigers, bears, each animal a captive terror bred or captured for the spectacle. Sometimes, exotic creatures like rhinoceroses or elephants participated, depending on an emperor's extravagance. Victims of damnatio ad bestias included criminals, prisoners of war, and Christians refusing to renounce their faith. They were marched into the arena to the roar of the crowd. Unlike gladiators, they wore minimal protection, often just a loincloth or light tunic. Some were given mock weapons, rusty daggers or blunt spears, but these were often too heavy or dull to serve as real defense. Once inside, the gates closed with a thunderous clang. The signal sounded and the beasts sprang forth. Their raw power, jaws unhinged, claws extended, was on full display. Panicked, the condemned tried to flee, but the sandy floor offered little traction. Bears charged, lions leapt, and boars gored. Some animals were specifically trained to attack humans. The arena reverberated with roars, screams, and the thud of bodies hitting sand. Damnatio ad bestias served multiple functions. It satisfied a public appetite for blood sport, reinforcing the emperor's image as provider of spectacle and order. It also enacted a primal fear, the reversal of master-beast roles. In daily life, humans ruled beasts. In the arena, that order was inverted. The spectator felt safe in the stands above the chaos, their social superiority reaffirmed by the victim's helplessness. By examining the Tarpeian rock and damnatio ad bestias, we see how Rome intertwined natural geography, an engineered spectacle to assert dominance. One method capitalized on the unforgiving force of gravity, casting traitors out from the community. The other harnessed raw animal ferocity, turning the arena into a stage of primal horror. As you settle back under your covers, note the paradox of these punishments. They were designed to instill fear, yet in recounting them, we find a peculiar fascination. These spectacles remind us of the malleable boundary between entertainment and terror, and how power can be wielded through both. In Rome's complex tapestry of justice, there existed a punishment that blended coercion with a veneer of dignity. Forced suicide with honor. Reserved for elite offenders, senators, provincial governors, or generals embroiled in political conspiracy, this sentence allowed the condemned to end their own lives, ostensibly preserving a shred of status and family reputation. Yet beneath the ritual lay a powerful message. Even Rome's most powerful were subject to its will. Imagine the marble corridors of the Curia Julia, where Rome's leading magistrates convened. Word spreads that a high-ranking official has been accused of treason or embezzlement. Whispers swirl around the Senate. He betrayed Rome. The emperor demands justice. Soon, the accused appears before a tribunal of peers. Men who once toasted his victories now stare in cold judgment. Rather than a raucous public execution, the proceedings unfold with restrained formality. The presiding magistrate reads the verdict, guilty. The penalty, prescribed suicide. A ceremonial dagger, pugio, is presented, ornate, sometimes inscribed with the city's seal. The condemned is given a moment to compose himself, to offer final words, to distribute his estate, to bid farewell to kin. On the morning of his death, the nobleman ascends a raised platform in the forum. Citizens gather at a respectful distance. Trumpets herald the occasion, not with fanfare but with solemn note. The condemned's family stands nearby, clad in traditional mourning togas. A priest invokes the gods of the underworld, calling for safe passage of the soul. Then comes the moment of truth. Taking the dagger, the man plunges the blade into his right side, just below the ribs, angled toward the heart. A gasp, a brief moment of crimson bloom on his white tunic, and then he collapses. Sometimes, family members step forward to ensure the deed is complete, ripping the dagger free and twisting it if necessary. Despite the ritual's veneer, forced suicide was anything but merciful. Physicians of the time noted excruciating pain, as the pericardium filled with blood, organs shifted, and the body convulsed. Prolonged agony could ensue if the blade missed vital structures. There were accounts of condemned men striking the dagger downward, away from the heart, prolonging their suffering, either from fear, bloodlust, or a subconscious hope for rescue. Why allow suicide rather than direct execution? For Rome's aristocracy, death always carried political weight. A public execution of a senator risked inflaming factions. Forced suicide allowed for an honorable exit, discouraging martyrdom or rebellion. Families retained some property rights, ensuring heirs could maintain status and influence. Yet the act was far from compassionate. It underlined the emperor's absolute power. He could even dictate the method of a man's death. By framing execution as honorable, Rome co-opted the language of virtue, dignitas, pietas, gravitas, using it to mask state violence. The ritual simultaneously showcased mercy and enforced obedience. One of the most dramatic examples involved Lucius Aemilius Paulus, a noted general and consul accused of conspiring against Emperor Claudius in 52 CE. After a closed trial, Paulus was summoned to the imperial palace. According to Tacitus, he delivered a stirring speech accepting the verdict, then stabbed himself in the presence of the emperor and assembled court. Reports suggest his final words praised Rome's glory and admonished future conspirators. Another notable case is Seneca the Younger, philosopher and tutor to Nero. In 65 CE, implicated in the Pisonian conspiracy, Seneca received the honorable sentence. He calmly opened his veins in his villa, reclining on a chaise while friends and disciples read from his own Stoic writings. His death, described by Suetonius, became a testament to Stoic endurance. Seneca reportedly joked about the coldness of the water used to fill his veins, even as life ebbed away. Forced suicide with honor stands apart from other Roman punishments for its blend of ritual, political calculation, and philosophical overtones. It wasn't mere state-sanctioned death, but a performance where Rome's elite confronted their mortality under the watchful gaze of law and tradition. As you sink deeper into your mattress, consider the paradox of this merciful penalty. The sovereign shields the condemned from public spectacle, yet compels him to self-inflicted agony. It's a chilling reminder that power can sanctify cruelty, dressing violence in the robes of honor. In our modern world, where debates swirl about capital punishment's morality, forced suicide with honor forces us to ask, can any state prescription for death ever be truly dignified? Or does the very act of sanctioned killing, no matter the pageantry, inevitably reveal the sovereign's ultimate authority over life? Also colloquially known as the pain pony, the wooden donkey was a device designed to humiliate and excruciate simultaneously. It consisted of a triangular wooden board, pointed at the top like a crude saddle, upon which the condemned was forced to straddle. Picture a makeshift scaffold erected in the Campus Martius, the Field of Mars. A low platform, barely a foot off the ground, supports a harsh wooden beam carved into a sharp, triangular prism. Soldiers or lictors bind the victim's wrists to the device's posts, legs splayed over its edges. The crowd gathers. Some jeer, others avert their eyes at the unspeakable cruelty about to unfold. Once secured, weights are tied to the condemned's feet, or sometimes additional weights hung from the wrists, forcing the body downward onto the cruel apex. Imagine the pressure, the flesh of the groin pressed razor sharp, pain radiating through the pelvis and lower spine. Each breath triggers a jolt of agony as muscles spasm. Sweat beads on the forehead. Tears slip from clenched eyes. Over the course of hours or even days, the victim might be released briefly for respite, only to be strapped back onto the board for another round. The purpose was twofold: inflict pain and break the spirit. As Roman writers grimly observed, there was no nobility in such suffering, only raw, unfiltered torment. Beyond the physical, the wooden donkey struck at a man's dignity. To be forced into such a position, grotesque, exposed, vulnerable, was to be stripped of honor. In a culture that prized virtues, manly excellence, and farmer reputation, the device served as a public branding of shame. Neighbors would speak of the condemned's degradation for years, ensuring that his name and disgrace lived on in memory. If the wooden donkey scarred the soul, then branding on the face scarred the flesh and preserved that shame for life. This punishment was reserved for grave offenses such as desertion, forgery, or disruptive public behavior. Early one morning, in a courtyard behind the questura, magistrate's office, the condemned is brought forth. A blacksmith, or specialized executioner, heats an iron brand in blazing coals until it glows white. The brand's design varies: a letter denoting the crime, V for vestrumentum, selling state property, or F for falsarius, forger, a symbol such as a snake or broken pillar, or the initials of a notorious criminal statute. The prisoner is seated, head tilted back. The executioner presses the red-hot iron firmly against the cheek or forehead, holding it in place for several heartbeats. A searing hiss fills the air, followed by the stifled screams of the branded. Flesh chars. Smoke curls upward. When the brand is lifted, a grotesque scar remains, raised, puckered, impossible to erase. Unlike an execution, branding allowed the offender to live. Yet life carried a burden. Every smile, every public appearance bore the mark of disgrace. Job prospects vanished. Potential marriages were called off. The branded individual became an outcast, his scar a constant reminder of a past transgression. Roman legal texts from the 3rd century CE mention that certain offences could lead to repeated branding. If he steals again, add another mark. Over time, some criminals bore multiple scars, like twisted badges of dishonor. Branding on the face was a perfect tool of social control. It physically inscribed the state's judgment onto the body, turning flesh into public record. Anyone who met the branded on the street would immediately know his crime. In a world without photographic mugshots, the living, breathing scar was the ultimate identifier, visible testimony to the power of Roman law. With the wooden donkey and facial branding, we see Rome's punishment evolve beyond mere death into lifelong stigma. One method inflicted excruciating agony and public humiliation. The other ensured that memory, both personal and communal, never let the offender escape his crimes. As you nestle deeper under your covers, consider how these penalties blurred the line between justice and cruelty. They remind us that, while our modern systems aim for rehabilitation or restitution, ancient Rome wielded punishment as a tool to reshape society through fear and lasting shame. In a society that valued pietas, piety toward the gods and the state, words held immense power. For those accused of blasphemy, sacrilege, or public insults against deities, Rome reserved a punishment that struck at the very source of speech: tongue removal. Imagine a crowded marketplace in Pompeii. Merchants hawk olives and wine. Children dodge carts packed with amphorae. Amid the bustle, someone shouts a vulgar curse against Jupiter, the thunder god whom every Roman revered. It could be drunken bravado, or a targeted insult to an unpopular official cloaked in divine association. But once the words escaped, the state moved swiftly. Roman law, drawing from both Lex Cornelia de Sacramentis and later imperial edicts, classified such public insults as crimes against the noumena, the divine spirits that sustained Rome's fortunes. To undermine the gods was, in effect, to threaten the city's fate itself. The condemned is brought before a magistrate's tribunal, often in a portico shaded by marble columns. A scribe reads aloud the accusation. You profane the sacred name of Jupiter Capitolinus by uttering blasphemous language in the presence of witnesses. No trial by jury awaited. The penalty was fixed: removal of the tongue. The executioner's block is fashioned with a semicircular groove designed to cradle the chin and stabilize the head. The prisoner's wrists are bound, forcing him to lean forward. With a single, practiced strike from a bronze blade, sharpened daily, the tongue is severed at its root. A gush of blood reddens the marble. The condemned chokes out a final sound, a throat-filled rasp that is never again repeated. Survival was not guaranteed. Many bled to death before medical attendants could cauterize the wound or apply poultices of vinegar and herbs. Those who lived faced a fate worse than death: permanent speechlessness. In a world where public oratory was the hallmark of citizenship, to lose one's tongue was to lose one's voice, literally and figuratively. Imagine the humiliation of being led through the forum, unable to protest innocence, forced to point at accusations, sign petitions with a tremulous hand instead of eloquent speech. Business deals, legal disputes, even declarations of love became impossible. The mute offender was consigned to the margins of society, a living monument to the price of impiety. By excising the tongue, Rome enacted a potent metaphor. The state had ultimate control over both body and speech. To insult the gods was to transgress the boundary between mortal opinion and divine authority, and the punishment physically sealed the offender's capacity to speak falsehood or blasphemy again. This penalty also reinforced communal norms. Spectators who witnessed the execution felt a shudder. If words could invoke such retribution, they learned caution in speech. In a culture rich with oratory, from Cicero's courts to Virgil's epic recitals, tongue removal served as a stark reminder that true power flowed from both what one said and what one chose to remain silent about. Often called the Catherine wheel in later European law, Rome's version, simply the wheel, was a device of slow, excruciating death. Unlike crucifixion's vertical display, the wheel laid victims supine, turning them into living canvases of suffering. The core apparatus was a large wooden wheel with thick spokes, sometimes recycled from a cart or chariot. The condemned was laid across the spokes, arms and legs spread wide, bound to prevent any movement. Executioners used iron cudgels, hammers, or maces to deliver systematic blows to the limbs. Imagine the condemned stretched naked upon the wheel, a patchwork of bruises already forming. With each swing of a heavy mallet, bones shattered. First the arms, then the legs, hip joints, and rib cage. The blows were administered in a ritual pattern: a dozen strikes to the right arm, a dozen to the left, moving clockwise around the body. Afterward, executioners wove the broken limbs through the spokes, binding them in place. The wheel was then hoisted onto a pole or scaffold, displaying the victim's twisted form for days. Depending on the sentence, the condemned might be left to die slowly, succumbing to shock, dehydration, or exposure. At times, guards delivered additional strikes to prolong agony or ensure death if the body showed signs of life. Breaking on the wheel served several purposes. Deterrence. The knowledge that one's body could be methodically dismantled and publicly exhibited was a powerful deterrent against heinous crimes like murder or rebellion. 2. Retribution. In a society valuing justicia, the methodical destruction of limbs mirrored the gravity of the offender's violation. An eye for an eye, taken to its grisliest extreme. Theatre, the wheel's slow unfolding. Horror captivated the populace, reinforcing state power through spectacle. Citizens gathered at dawn to witness the raising of the wheel, as priests offered prayers for both the victim's soul and Rome's sanctity. Though later Christian martyrs transformed the wheel into a symbol of holy suffering. Saint Catherine of Alexandria's legend, for example, Rome's original intent was secular and punitive. The wheel was not reserved for the pious or noble. It was a punishment for common criminals judged beyond redemption. In some provinces, local governors adopted the wheel to demonstrate loyalty to Rome. Archaeological finds in Gaul reveal stone, bases once used to anchor wheels, and inscriptions detail administrators overseeing executions. These regional variations underscore the wheel's versatility as both practical device and emblem of Roman authority. Tongue removal and breaking on the wheel represent some of Rome's most visceral methods of erasing both voice and body. One punishment robbed the power of speech, the other dismantled the very structure of the human form. Both were public affirmations of state supremacy, demonstrations that the law could reach into every corner of existence. As you draw your blankets tight and let your eyelids grow heavy, remember, these ancient practices illuminate the extremes to which societies once went to maintain order. In our time, where rights to free speech and protections against cruel punishment are fiercely debated, the memory of these methods serves as a testament to how far human dignity has come. Among Rome's arsenal of punishments, execution by hot ash stands out for its slow, insidious torment. Rather than direct flame, this method harnessed the residual heat of embers, ash still glowing from a dying fire. Visualize a secluded courtyard behind a provincial governor's villa. A large hearth is stoked at dawn, logs burn down to hot coals. Once the flames die, the coals are raked away, leaving a bed of embers covered by a thin layer of fine ash. The executioner tests the temperature with a metal rod, too hot for bare skin, just right for cruelty. The condemned, often slaves guilty of arson or mutiny, are stripped naked and forced to lie face down on the ashbed. Soldiers hold their arms and legs firmly in place, ensuring contact. Some accounts mention that additional weights were placed atop the victim's back, increasing pressure and forcing the hot ash deeper into the flesh. From the moment skin touches ash, pain flares. Ash, unlike flames, clings to the body. It seeps into pores, adheres to sweat-slicked skin, and embeds in hair. As the victim convulses, embers glow bright orange against reddening flesh. Smoke rises in thin wisps, each inhalation laced with acrid sting. Pain receptors on the skin send relentless signals to the brain. Third-degree burns begin within seconds. Flesh chars, muscles contract spasmodically, and nerve endings writhe in agony. Throughout, the crowd, limited to soldiers and officials, watches. In grim silence, the air heavy with the smell of burning flesh. Ash held a paradoxical place in Roman ritual, a sign of mourning, purification, and renewal. By subverting ash's symbolic purity to enact punishment, Romans sent a message. The state could pervert symbols of hope and rebirth into instruments of death. The hot ash execution blurred the boundary between cleansing fire and vengeful flame. Imagine the condemned adorned not in simple tunic, but in one saturated with pitch, oil, and flammable resins, a garment designed to burn. Charged criminals, usually those guilty of severe betrayal or corruption, are dressed in this combustible tunic. The execution takes place at dusk in an open square. Onlookers circled at a safe distance watch as flames are ignited beneath the victim. Within moments, the tunic erupts in fire, wrapping the body in flickering orange tongues. The victim's screams echo, smoke curling upward in dark plumes. Unlike being thrown into a pyre, the victim cannot prepare or chant. The conflagration is swift on the surface, but slow at the core, burning through layered fabric and searing flesh. By clothing the condemned in a weaponized garment, Rome stripped the individual of agency over his death. There was no choice of method or timing. The state dictated every aspect. The visual spectacle of a burning human figure conveyed absolute dominance. Roman law could envelop life itself in fire. After the body is gone, Rome sometimes pursued an even darker sentence, damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. This was not a method of execution, but of erasure. The state decreed that the condemned's name be struck from inscriptions, statues smashed, portraits defaced, and all public records amended. Family tombs might have the deceased's name chiseled out. In effect, the individual was erased from the annals of history. Damnatio memoriae served as the ultimate posthumous penalty, death of identity. In a society where ancestral honor mos maiorum, mattered deeply, erasure equated to a second death, one where even the gods might forget the soul without proper remembrance. Famous victims included Emperor Geta, whose brother Caracalla ordered his brother's memory obliterated after murdering him in 211 CE. Geta's very name vanished from coins. His statues were toppled. Yet paradoxically, these actions have ensured his story persists. History remembers damnation even as it tries to forget. With these final three methods, execution by hot ash, the combustible tunic, and damnatio memoriae, Rome demonstrated that punishment could extend beyond flesh into the realm of memory itself. Victims were consumed by heat, cloaked in fire, and then stripped from memory, their existence negated on earth and in the hearts of their descendants. As your eyelids grow heavier, reflect on how societies wield symbols, ash, clothes, names, to control both life and legacy. In our own era, where digital footprints can be erased with a keystroke, the concept of damnatio memoriae resonates anew. But unlike ancient Rome's brute force, today's erasures are quieter, concealed behind screens. Centuries after Rome's grand arenas fell silent, another frontier beckoned those willing to brave the unknown. The vast, uncharted lands west of the Mississippi River. This chapter explores three pivotal elements of America's westward surge: the Louisiana Purchase, the iconic covered wagon, and the unforgiving life on the trail. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson completed one of the most audacious land deals in history, the Louisiana Purchase. For just $15 million, less than 3 cents per acre, the United States acquired approximately 828,000 square miles from France, doubling the young nation's size overnight. Jefferson envisioned an empire of liberty, where yeoman farmers would cultivate fertile plains, anchor democracy, and keep tyranny at bay. But acquiring land was just the beginning. Populating it required determination, resourcefulness, and an appetite for risk. Word spread along river towns, St. Louis, New Orleans, Pittsburgh, like wildfire. Newspapers proclaimed cheap land and opportunity knocks in the West. Families sold eastern farms, loaded belongings onto flatboats, and floated down the Mississippi. Others hired wagons and oxen, forming caravans that would snake over prairies and through mountain passes. Migration was neither swift nor simple. Maps were rudimentary. Trails often followed buffalo herds more than surveyed lines. Settlers grappled with river crossings, impassable bogs, and hostile weather. Yet the promise of land ownership, a cornerstone of Jeffersonian idealism, propelled some 250,000 people westward within a decade. As settlements pushed farther west, a new icon emerged: the covered wagon, also known as the prairie schooner, for its white canvas top billowing like a ship's sail. Built on sturdy wooden wheels, up to 4 feet high, to traverse rutted trails, prairie schooners measured roughly 12 feet long and 4 feet wide. Canvas covers, treated with oil to repel rain, sheltered families and fragile possessions from sun, wind, and dust. Beneath the wagon bed, explorers stowed barrels of water, sacks of cornmeal, and precious tools: axes, rifles, sewing kits. Each wagon typically had 1 or 2 oxen or mules, preferred for their endurance over horses. Drivers used long whips, guiding the slow-moving teams across shifting terrains. Wagons formed wagon trains, groups of 10 to 20 vehicles traveling together for safety. Nightly campfires burned in cleared circles, with wagons arranged in a hollow square to guard against wolves or bandits. Space was cramped. A family of 5 might share a single chest, a hastily fashioned cot, and stacked bedding. During rainstorms, water dripped through canvas seams. In dust storms, grit coated every surface. To pass time, women sewed, men carved wooden tools, and children chased prairie dogs in between rest stops, crossing over 2,000 miles from the Missouri River. To the Rocky Mountains was a grueling enterprise of months, fraught with peril and perseverance. Dawn alarm came via oxen lowing and wagon wheels creaking. Camp cooks kindled embers, warming coffee made from ground chicory or leftover beans. Breakfasts were simple: hardtack biscuits, salted pork, and coffee. Then came packing and rolling, securing, wagons, tending oxen, and consulting hand-drawn maps or trail guides like the Oregon or California trail journals. Disease. Cholera lurked in river water. Dysentery struck swiftly and could kill within days. Weather. Summer heat scorched leather. Winter snows trapped wagons in mountain passes like the Sierra Nevada's Donner Pass. Terrain. River fords could become death traps. Steep inclines tested both teams and drivers. Conflict. Encounters with native tribes ranged from peaceful trade, exchanging blankets and corn, to violent skirmishes over land encroachment. Despite these dangers, camaraderie flourished. Wagon trains established makeshift schools, held Sunday services, and shared resources when food ran low. Diary entries from a mother named Sarah Whitman in 1845 recall her 2-year-old daughter chasing prairie dogs while she washed laundry in the Platte River, small moments of normalcy amid uncertainty. The American frontier was not merely a physical journey, but a crucible of aspirations and anxieties. From the bold stroke of the Louisiana Purchase to the humble prairie schooner and the relentless grind of trail life, each element shaped a new nation's character. As you nestle under your covers, imagine the vast prairies stretching to the horizon, the rattle of wagon chains on rocky ground, and the shared hope of families forging a future in a land both inviting and unforgiving. These pioneers carried more than possessions. They carried a vision that, centuries later, still echoes in the American spirit of exploration and possibility. Having crossed endless plains in covered wagons, the next trial for westward migrants was to stake a claim on the land itself. In this section, we delve into two intertwined elements of frontier life: homesteading, the grueling work of turning wilderness into farmland, and the often overlooked roles of women, whose grit and ingenuity kept families afloat on the edge of civilization. In 1862, the US Congress passed the Homestead Act, offering 160 acres of public land to any citizen, or intended citizen, who would improve the plot by building a dwelling and cultivating the soil for at least 5 years. The promise of free land sparked a new wave of settlement. But as always, promises on the frontier exacted a steep price. Imagine the first morning after arrival. The dawn light spills across a sea of tall grass, broken only by the silhouette of your canvas wagon. You stand barefoot in dew-soaked soil, surveying your 160-acre parcel. No fences, no neighbors for miles, just prairie stretching to distant hills. First order of business, surveying. With a simple compass and measuring chain, you mark boundary, corners. Then comes the back-breaking task of building a shelter. Often, pioneers erected a soddy, a dugout built into a hill with walls and roof made of sod bricks. The earth itself provided insulation, keeping interiors cool in summer and warmer in winter. Once a roof stood over your head, you faced the monumental work of clearing and planting. Thick prairie sod, matted with deep roots, had to be broken with a breaking plough, a heavy iron beam pulled by oxen. Each furrow opened revealed clumps of rich soil, tangled with roots that snapped under blade and iron. Planting followed swiftly. Corn for feed, wheat for sale, potatoes for sustenance. Water was scarce. Families dug shallow well holes or relied on seasonal creeks. Crop failure due to drought, locust swarms, or early frost was a perennial risk. There were no guarantees, only the hope that soil and sweat would yield a harvest sufficient to satisfy the 5-year requirement for full land ownership. Homesteaders were isolated, but isolation bred cooperation. Neighbors, once spotted on the horizon, became claim partners for building cabins or barns. Barn raisings emerged as communal rituals, dozens of settlers forming human chains to lift giant timbers into place. In return, the host family provided a feast of salted pork and cornbread, sealing social bonds vital for survival. Homesteading was more than agriculture. It was an act of transformation, of human will over environment. Each sod brick laid, each furrow turned, stitched settlers to the land. Yet beneath the optimism lay constant adversity, the threat of crop failure, the loneliness of vast horizons, and the ticking clock of the 5-year requirement. As you drift towards sleep, consider the pioneers who coughed through prairie dust and waded into creeks to water their first crops, all driven by a dream of land ownership that would reshape a nation. Often cast as the silent backbone of homesteading families, women on the frontier performed an astonishing array of tasks. Their daily work blurred the lines between domestic duties and farm labor, revealing how essential women were to the pioneer dream. From sunrise to dusk, frontier women managed household economies with remarkable resourcefulness. Their tasks included cooking. Open hearth stoves fueled by prairie wood demanded constant attention. Bread baked in cast-iron Dutch ovens, stews simmered in iron pots, and coffee beans roasted over coals, all prepared under the watchful eye of the pioneer cook. Preserving food. Summer harvests had to be canned, dried, or pickled for winter. Jars of peaches, salted pork barrels, and smoked fish racks lined crude shelves in root cellars or soddy corners. Textiles and clothing. Women spun wool, wove cloth on simple looms, and sewed garments from calico or coarse homespun. When children outgrew clothes, mothers patched and repurposed scraps, an early form of recycling essential on the frontier. Healthcare. Without formal doctors, women served as midwives and herbalists. They brewed poultices of comfrey for bruises, crushed willow bark for fever, and delivered babies in cramped cabins, often using knowledge passed down from older relatives. Women didn't confine themselves to hearth and home. They ventured into fields and barns, planting and weeding. When fields spanned acres, sisters helped brothers plant seeds and pull weeds by hand, sometimes bending under the sun for hours. Livestock care. Feeding chickens, milking cows, and tending to a sick sheep were tasks shared by all family members. On some farms, women drove cattle or hogs to market on horseback. Harvesting. During harvest season, every hand was needed. Women wielded sickles, bound sheaves of wheat, and drove wagons laden with bundles to dry stacks. Beyond labor, frontier women often initiated social and educational institutions. Sunday schools and study circles, converting log cabins into makeshift schools or meeting places. Women taught reading, writing, and Bible lessons to children and adults alike. Aid societies. In times of crisis, drought, crop failure, or illness, women organized charity efforts, sewing, quilts, raising funds, or sharing food with needy neighbors. First-hand letters reveal the emotional fortitude of these women. In an 1872 letter from Mary Ann Boone, she wrote, "I rose before dawn to bake bread, yet found time to tend ailing John and teach little Clara her letters. Sometimes I wept as I worked, but I dared not linger, for each task is a thread in the fabric of our home." Such words remind us that frontier women were not passive figures. They were decision-makers, caregivers, and innovators whose efforts underpinned every homestead. Homesteading and women's roles on the frontier weave a portrait of resilience and community. While men ploughed fields and raised barns, women ensured that cabins were homes, warm, nourishing, and filled with learning. Their combined labor forged new settlements out of untamed land, setting the stage for America's westward expansion. As you settle under your blankets, imagine hearth fires crackling in soddy walls, the smell of fresh-baked biscuits washing over prairie winds, and families gathered at dusk, a testament to what determination and cooperation can achieve. As settlers pressed ever westward, they inevitably crossed paths with the continent's original inhabitants, an encounter that ranged from cooperative trade to tragic conflict. The story of relations with Native Americans on the frontier is one of shifting alliances, cultural misunderstandings, and the harsh calculus of survival. Picture a bright morning on the Platte River. A wagon train halts to camp on the grassy banks. Smoke from campfires curls into the clear sky as families unload flour sacks and trade goods. From the nearby woodline emerges a small party of Oto-Missouria hunters. Tanned faces, feathered hair, and leather pouches slung across their chests. With cautious formality, both parties approach. Wagons are arranged in a loose semicircle. Settlers, display beads, metal knives, kettles, and wool blankets, items prized by tribes for their durability and luster. In exchange, Native Americans offer buffalo robes, dried corn, smoked buffalo meat, and guidance on water sources. Language barriers are bridged by simple signs, pointing at goods, mimicking actions, nodding respectfully. These early interactions, driven by mutual necessity, could be warm and collegial. Settlers learned which rivers ran shallow in summer, where wild fruit grew in abundance, and how to track game. Native guides sometimes led wagon trains along more reliable routes, avoiding marshes and hidden sandbars that could bog down axles. In return, tribes acquired tools that transformed everyday tasks, metal axes that split logs faster than stone hatchets, and sewing needles that mended hides in minutes. But hospitality had limits. As more homesteads sprang up, land once shared became contested. Settlers raised fences and cleared fields, signaling permanent occupation. Buffalo herds, central to many Plains tribes' way of life, waned under relentless hunting. Settlers' livestock trampled native grasses. Broken, treaties left tribes without promised goods or territory. By the mid-1850s, conflicts erupted. In Kansas and Nebraska territories, skirmishes over grazing rights and stolen horses escalated. Families huddled in sod houses as distant rifle fire echoed across prairie grasses. Some migrants formed vigilance committees, deputizing citizens to pursue raiding native bands, often with little distinction between warriors and civilians. Despite violence, pockets of peaceful coexistence endured. In Oregon country, the Flathead and Nez Perce people guided settlers through mountain passes, even sheltering trapped wagon trains during snowstorms. Yet these alliances frayed under government policies. The US Army enforced the removal of tribes to reservations, often by force. Imagine dawn at a tribal encampment on the Loup River circa 1874. Cavalry units arrive in formation, sabers gleaming. Orders bark that families must pack swiftly. Failure to comply invites martial law. The tribe loads teepees and sacred bundles onto wagons, some borrowed from settlers, while children flee with tears. Forced marches of hundreds of miles to arid reservations follow, leaving ancestral hunting grounds and ritual sites behind. Even amid dispossession, Native American cultures showed remarkable resilience. Tribes reconstituted communities on reservations, preserving languages, ceremonies, and arts. In annual powwows, drumbeats and dancing cloaked painful memories in celebrations of heritage. Storytellers shared legends of trickster coyote and great spirit, reminding both tribal members relations with Native Americans on the frontier were never static. They ranged from warm trade alliances to enforced exile. These encounters illuminate the complex human dimensions of westward expansion, questions of morality, survival, and respect for different ways of life. As you sink deeper under your covers, contemplate the courage of both settlers and indigenous peoples. One group seeking new beginnings, the other striving to protect ancestral homelands. Both shape the land and its history, and both remind us of the weight of promises and the consequences when they're broken. On the edge of civilization, formal courts and trained judges were often days or weeks away. To fill the void, settlers devised their own system. Frontier justice, a blend of improvised law enforcement, elected judges, and sometimes vigilante action. Imagine a newly formed town on the banks of the Platte, 1866. The town meeting convenes in a hastily built schoolhouse, walls of rough-hewn logs, benches of split timber. In the front, an oak log serves as judge's bench. Citizens nominate a local rancher and a retired lawyer, men known for fairness, to serve as magistrates. They draw lots to decide who presides over disputes this month. Disagreements over fence lines, stray livestock, or unpaid debts fill the docket. Witnesses testify under oath, sworn on a family Bible or a pocket watch. Decisions are rendered on the spot. Split rails for a broken fence. Cattle returned with a fine or short jail terms in a lumber-built cell behind the schoolhouse. Appeals go to larger territorial courts in places like Denver or Salt Lake City. A journey that could take weeks but was occasionally undertaken. Yet when crimes seemed too grave, stagecoach robberies, murder, or rustling gangs, formal mechanisms lag behind public outrage. Vigilance committees sprang up. Bands of armed citizens patrolled dusty streets at night, breaking up saloons and chasing horse thieves with whistle and lantern. Trials were swift, evidence often circumstantial, and verdicts delivered by jury of peers who knew the accused by reputation. Worse, lynching sometimes replaced any pretense of trial. A mob might seize an accused killer from a jailhouse, drag him to the nearest limb, often a sturdy elm, and hang him without formal charge. These extrajudicial killings targeted outlaws, but also vulnerable minorities, including Chinese railroad, workers and Mexican vaqueros, reflecting racial prejudices of the time. As territories matured, new tools emerged. Telegraph lines allowed sheriffs in Denver to alert frontier outposts of escaped convicts. Railway couriers transported written warrants across long distances. By the 1880s, the U.S. Marshals Service established regional offices, dispatching posse comitatus, groups of deputies empowered to pursue lawbreakers across county lines. Peacemakers like Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson embodied this transition from raw vigilante justice to proto-professional law enforcement. Their black-coated silhouettes, holstered pistols gleaming under lamplight, patrolled boomtowns like Dodge City, Kansas. They enforced curfews, broke up riots, and sometimes bent rules to keep the peace. Frontier justice fulfilled a primal need for order. In a world with no guaranteed protection, communities enforced norms through collective action. Public shaming, tar and feathering in some locales, stressed communal values. When a murderer was hanged in the town square, the whole community bore witness. A ritual reaffirming that even on the frontier, law mattered. Frontier justice was a product of necessity and communal will. It combined democratic election of magistrates, the raw power of vigilance committees, and emerging federal law enforcement. In doing so, it forged a transition from the anarchic push of pioneers to the structured society that would define the settled West. As you nestle deeper under blankets, ponder the delicate balance between law and liberty. What happens when formal justice cannot reach everyone? And how do communities navigate the line between protection and persecution? By the late 1860s, two technologies reshaped the American West: the transcontinental railroad and the telegraph. Together, they collapsed distance, transforming months-long journeys and weeks-long communications into matters of days and hours. Imagine dawn breaking over the Rocky Mountains in 1869. Engineers and thousands of laborers, Union Pacific crews, moving westward from Omaha and Central Pacific workers pushing east from Sacramento, lay iron rails across unforgiving terrain. Chinese immigrants drilled through granite with black powder. Irish crews tamped bridges across rivers and canyons on Naraim. May 10, 1869, at Promontory Summit, Utah, two golden spikes connected the rails. Telegraph wires ran alongside the tracks, carrying the final message. Done. The click-clack of the locomotive replaced creaking wagon wheels. What once took 6 months by wagon now required just 7 days by rail. For settlers, the railroad offered unprecedented convenience. Passenger travel. Families boarded wooden coaches, reclining on padded seats as the world rolled by outside plate glass windows. Meals arrived on dining cars, and sleeping berths swayed gently through tunnels. Freight and mail. Goods formerly hauled by oxen, flour, machinery, livestock feed, now travelled by boxcar. The mail, once delivered by horseback riders, zipped across telegraph lines as coded Morse dots and dashes, then was distributed by rail to small towns. Economic boom. Towns sprouted at rail stops, Station houses became trading posts. Blacksmiths turned to machine shops, and hotels catered to travelers. Land speculators advertised railroad town lots alongside promises of rapid growth. Samuel Morse's invention of the telegraph in the 1830s reached the West alongside the tracks. By 1861, lines spanned from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco. Wire stations, small cabins with glass windows, stood every 20 miles, where operators tapped out messages. Instant communication reshaped governance. Law enforcement. Sheriffs received bulletins about wanted outlaws, issuing warrants that could be transmitted instantaneously across territories. Business. Bankers in New York wired credit approvals to San Francisco. Cattle ranchers checked market prices in Chicago before planning drives. Personal. Letters. Replaced by brief telegrams. Arrived safe. Send supplies. Love, Mary. The speed of news reduced isolation, binding frontier communities to the nation. Rails and wires symbolize progress's double edge. They offered safety, prosperity, and connection, but also propelled waves of settlement that further displaced Native American tribes and accelerated environmental changes across prairies and mountains. As you drift towards sleep, picture the whistle of a locomotive echoing through desert canyons and the rhythmic tapping of telegraph keys in lonely stations. Signs of an era in which human ingenuity remade the land and rewove the fabric of American life. On March 29, 1890, the U.S. Census Bureau announced a startling proclamation. The American frontier was officially closed. For the first time in history, no territory in the continental United States qualified as a frontier, an unsettled region where the population density was fewer than 2 persons per square mile. Since Thomas Jefferson's time, Americans viewed frontier lands as vital to democracy's health, places of opportunity where individuals could reinvent themselves. Census takers, trudging across homesteads and railroad towns, gathered population data, then overlaid maps with density calculations. When the 1890 report arrived, it marked a symbolic turning point. The nation was no longer defined by expansion into unknown lands, but by development within established borders. The Frontier Closed Declaration rippled through American thought. Historical reflection. Historian Frederick Jackson Turner delivered his famous 1893 Frontier Thesis, arguing that the frontier experience shaped American individualism, democracy, and innovation, and that its closure signified the end of a formative era. Economic shift. Investors turned from land speculation to industrial ventures. Railroads consolidated. Oil fields and factories beckoned in the east. Cultural nostalgia. Stories of cowboys and pioneers flooded literature, theater, and emerging film, crystallizing the mythos of the West even as it vanished. The closure of the frontier forced Americans to reconcile with a mature nation. No longer a land of unclaimed territories, the United States faced questions of conservation, urbanization, and social reform. The frontier's end was not merely geographical, it was a cultural crossroads, prompting collective introspection about identity and purpose. As you nestle deeper into your blankets, imagine cartographers mapping every square mile, census takers recording each homestead, and a nation pausing to declare the frontier's sunset. The American dream had transmuted, but its embers still glow in the stories we tell and the landscapes we guard. Long before written notation or grand concert halls, music emerged from the human body and natural materials. In this section, we explore 3 foundational stages: body percussion, Ice Age flutes, and drums as the heartbeat of communities. Imagine a gathering around a campfire in prehistoric times. Before crafted instruments existed, early humans discovered that their own bodies could create rhythm. Clapping hands, 2 palms striking together produce a sharp, resonant snap. Clapping followed the pulse of communal song, marking time and unifying participants. Stomping feet. On hard ground, stomps added a lower frequency thump, grounding the rhythm. slapping thighs and chest. Variations in flesh and bone textures created different timbres. Thick pads of the thighs yielded muffled beats, while the hollow chest produced fuller, echoing sounds. Vocalizations, humming, chanting, and grunts layered melody over percussive textures, using pitch and volume to evoke emotion. Body percussion required no tools, only bodies synchronized in communal expression. Anthropologists believe such practices fostered social bonding, synchronized movement and sound release endorphins, enhancing group cohesion. In times of hunt, ritual, or even mourning, rhythmic claps and stomps helped coordinate efforts, whether driving game or channeling grief into shared ceremony. About 40,000 years ago, our ancestors experimented with natural materials to extend musical range. Archaeologists uncovered bone flutes carved from vulture and mammoth bones in European cave sites, e.g., Hohlfels, Germany. These Ice Age flutes represent humanity's first portable melodic instruments. Material selection. Vulture wing bones and mammoth ivory offered hollow chambers ideal for aerophones. Drilling finger holes. Craftsmen carefully bored holes spaced to yield specific pitches, often 5 to 6 holes for a pentatonic scale. Blowhole design, a notch or fipple-guided air, producing clear, flute-like tones. When played, these flutes emitted haunting, pure notes that carried through caves' acoustics. Imagine echoes bouncing on limestone walls as early musicians performed in dim firelight. The melodies likely mimicked natural sounds, bird calls or wind gusts, connecting performers to their environment. Cultural significance. These flutes suggest that melody held deep meaning for early humans. Melodic music could accompany shamanistic rituals, mark seasonal changes, or strengthen social identity. The technical precision of bone flutes indicates that Paleolithic societies valued musical expertise, passing down specialized skills across generations. Across continents, drums emerged, independently as essential instruments, whether constructed from hollowed logs, tortoise shells, or stretched animal hides. Drums provided the rhythmic backbone of tribal life. Frame drums. Simple wooden rings covered by stretched skin, played with hands or sticks. Log drums. Hollowed tree trunks with carved tongues that resonated when struck. Goblet drums. Ceramics or wood shaped like goblets, with a membrane across the broad end. Communication. Drum signals transmitted messages over distances, warning of danger, calling people to gather, or signaling the start of hunt. Ceremony and dance. Drums marked tempo for ritual dances, guiding participants through complex steps. The steady pulse symbolized life's heartbeat, reinforcing communal unity. Healing practices. Shamans used drumming to induce trance states, believing rhythmic sounds could bridge worlds of the living and spirits. Drumming circles promoted egalitarian participation. Anyone could join, creating an interactive, music-making environment. The shared rhythms synchronized heart rates and brain waves, fostering empathy and collective identity. In many cultures, drumming persists as a cornerstone of festival and spiritual life. Proof that foundational beats developed tens of thousands of years ago still resonate today. From clapping hands to crafted bone flutes and resonant drums, early music embodied humanity's drive to create connection. These primal sounds laid the groundwork for the vast musical traditions that followed, reminding us that at its core, music is an expression of shared experience. As you drift towards slumber, let these ancient rhythms echo in your mind. The hollow thump of a drum, the plaintive call of a flute, and the unifying clap of hands. In the stillness of night, they become a lullaby older than civilization itself. Our musical journey culminates with 3 chapters of cultural synthesis: the martial and civic music of Rome, the spiritual depth of Indian ragas and talas, and the courtly elegance of Chinese harmony. Each tradition expanded on foundational rhythms and melodies, weaving sound into the fabric of empire. When Rome's legions marched forth, They carried more than weapons. They carried instruments that united foot soldiers and civilians alike. Military music served as both command system and communal rallying cry. Cornu and tuba brass instruments like the cornu, a large curved horn, and the tuba, a straight bronze trumpet, issued clear, piercing calls. On the battlefield, centurions recognized signals for advance, retreat, or reforming ranks. In civilian life, these horns announced public games and ceremonies, their resonant blasts echoing through forums and amphitheaters. Bucina and classic kettle drums. The bucina, a horn made from an ox horn or bronze tube, paired with kettle drums in parades. The steady drumbeat matched marching pace, instilling discipline and morale. During triumphal processions, drum and horn heralded victorious generals, leading lions and captives through cheering crowds. Hydraulis, water organ. In the 1st century BCE, innovators introduced the hydraulis, an early pipe organ powered by water pressure. Its majestic tones provided entertainment in amphitheaters and private villas. Imagine the swell of pipes, each note emerging with regal clarity, filling stone colonnades as senators and plebeians alike paused in solemn appreciation. Roman public music thus balanced function and festivity, turning sound into an instrument of statecraft. Half a world away, on the Indian subcontinent, music evolved into a deeply spiritual language. From as early as 200 BCE, theorists codified ragas, melodic frameworks, and talas, rhythmic cycles, crafting an intricate system that guided both performer and listener into transcendent experience. A raga consists of a specific sequence of notes, ornaments, and characteristic motifs. Each raga evokes a particular mood: bhakti, devotion, romance, or tranquility. Performed at prescribed times of day or night, ragas aligned human emotion with nature's rhythms. Morning ragas greeted the sun. Evening ragas mirrored dusk's calm. Tala rhythmic patterns in Indian music revolve around talas, cyclic beats counted on fingers. The most common, teental, comprises 16 beats divided into 4 equal sections. Tabla players articulate these cycles with hand gestures and drum strokes, weaving complex variations that challenge both memory and coordination. Picture a courtyard in Varanasi. A sitar's metallic strings ring out, intertwining with tabla, pulses. As notes soar and swoop, both musician and audience enter a meditative trance. The raga's ascent and descent mirror inhalation and exhalation, while the tala's heartbeat propels the journey. In this tradition, music becomes a path to inner awakening. In ancient China, music served as cosmic mirror, reflecting heaven's order in earthly rule. Confucian scholars codified musical systems to cultivate moral character and political stability. Yue and Li the Zhou dynasty distinguished between Yue, ritual music of virtue, and Li, decorative music for entertainment. Yue ensembles featured bronze bells, bianzhong, stone chimes, and silk zithers, se, their measured tones reinforcing social hierarchy and cosmic harmony during court ceremonies. Scale and tuning. Chinese theorists developed a 12-tone scale dividing the octave into equal steps, and refined pitch through mathematical calculations recorded in treatises such as the Classic of Music. This scientific approach linked music to astronomy and astrology, each pitch aligning with a celestial body or season. Court performances. In a palace courtyard at dawn, musicians in silk robes played in seated rows. The gentle pluck of a guqin zither, the deep resonance of bronze bells, and the breathy harmonies of bamboo flutes. Dancers in flowing costumes moved in precise formations, embodying Confucian ideals of balance and order. Through formal music, Chinese emperors asserted the mandate of heaven, claiming that virtuous rule produced harmonious sound, while discordant music signaled moral decay. From Rome's martial horns to India's spiritual ragas and China's ritual ensembles, music has woven itself into the grand tapestry of human civilization. Each tradition built upon the primal heartbeat of body percussion and the simple flute's melody, extending into complex instruments and theories that blended art, science, and spirituality. Continuity and change. The cornu's call and the raga's lament may seem worlds apart, yet both remind us that music encodes emotion, identity, and power. Instruments evolve, scales shift, and technologies, like Rome's hydraulis or the telegraph, reshape how we share sound. Yet the impulse remains the same: to connect, to express, and to transcend. A lullaby for history. As you lie beneath your covers, consider the epochs and empires that echoed with these harmonies. The next time you hear a horn, a drum, or a resonant zither, you'll sense the echoes of ancient hands and voices. And as sleep gently claims you, let this universal language carry you across time, reminding you that, in every culture and era, music has been our shared dream. Thank you for joining this journey through history's strangest punishments, wild frontiers, and timeless melodies. May these stories linger like a final chord, guiding you into a restful night and inspiring dreams of distant worlds and ancient songs. Good night, and may your sleep be as enduring as the music of the ages.